Thank you so much for joining us today, both here in Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. Sorry, just checking my microphone here, but it's a great delight to welcome each of you, first of all, in person and online. We have quite a number of folks online, and so I want to welcome you from all over the globe, apparently. And so we're just delighted to be able to have this event. And most especially, I want to thank all of the co-sponsors here at Georgetown, the Collaborative on Global Children's Issues, the Welsh School of Foreign Service, the Center for Child and Human Development, Center for Social Justice Research, Teaching and Service, and my own program towards a global culture of safeguarding here at Georgetown University, here at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, the Office of Mission and Ministry, the Global Human Development Program, the Global Health Initiative, and Laboratory for Global Performance and Politics at Georgetown University. You'll see as you look at the link in your chat box to a series of events this week that is sponsored by the Children in a World of Challenges workshop series being held this week. We invite you to go to their website at the Collaborative for Global Children's Issues and see all of the other various events that are here on campus. And please send that link to all your friends. It's an extraordinary series of events that I'm very proud to be part of and humbled to be invited into. And most especially to you, Gillian, as director of this collaborative. So congratulations. I want to give our audience here in person, but also online, what we call a trigger warning. We will be talking about stories of survivors. We will be talking sometimes in detail about these stories, a friend's story, a family story, that could trigger your own abuse history if you are a survivor. We ask you to please take care of yourself and do what you might need in this regard. Most especially, we want to welcome and thank all the survivors online and here in person, and families of survivors. We want to honor your experience first and foremost, and really bring that voice into our discussion and bring that voice forward in a very special way. We honor you, and perhaps we can just pause for a moment of silence to reflect upon and honor them and reverence them. Thank you. Practical issue, you'll see for those of you online, the Q&A feature at the bottom there. And feel free to put in your questions that you may have. We'll have a period of time after our presentations at this juncture to then allow you a period of questions, and hopefully we can answer them and have our panelists, our esteemed panelists, join in answering that. The aim of today is really a unique collaboration with and from the needs of several local faith communities and parish communities, and really students here at Georgetown. We believe that this is what the Catholic Church and the leadership of Pope Francis is really calling us into, and being a listening faith community, or in the Catholic tradition, a synodal church. The key question for us today is, how can we begin to honor the voices of children, most especially, and of survivors, of key family members who are survivors, the voices from the pews and voices from the classrooms. Our objective today is rather simple: to place the experiences and voices of survivors, the voices of children, at the center of our faith community's response. Can we give witness, as our Jewish colleagues and friends say, a righteous witness, to the horror of suffering, pain, often the unspeakable atrocity, and still offer some hope and healing, still offer signs of hope and resilience? And so today we will point to what are mechanisms, what are ways in which we can look forward to cultural change, cultural transformation from various perspectives. My name's Jerry McGlone. I'm a Jesuit priest, and I'm also a survivor of sexual abuse by a Jesuit and a survivor of Jesuit sexual misconduct. I lead the program here at the Berkeley Center towards a global culture of safeguarding. I am a survivor, as I said, and today we will welcome voices of other survivors from the pews and from the classroom. So let's welcome our panelists this day. In a very special way, I'd like to welcome Evelyn Christina Radu, who's currently a freshman at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. I had the honor and privilege of meeting Christina in Professor Marshall's class last semester. She continues to develop her American Sign Language skills with the University Signs Program, works with the African Student Group, Black Student Alliance. Prior to coming to Georgetown, Radu was a gymnast for 11 years and maintains her connection as a sport to the judge. And so tell me a little bit about yourself and what attracts you to this particular panel today.
Hi, my name is Evelyn Christina Radu, and I am a freshman at Georgetown. I am in the School of Foreign Service. I'm hoping to study culture and politics. I'm from Laurel, Maryland, and I went to high school in Greenbelt, Maryland, which is not too far from here. And I'm really coming here with the interest of mental health and the way that we can help students, having grown up in the public education system myself, how we can help these students really build themselves up both in and out of the public education system. And I really wanted to highlight some aspects of hope and resilience in my own community. And that's just where I'm coming from today.
Thank you so much, Christina. It's part of the joy of preparing for this panel is just getting to know the panelists so well in just a short amount of time. And so welcome and thank you. We also now have Bob Stump, who has been a member of a parish nearby that some of you may have heard of called Holy Trinity. He serves in various ministries there, and he's co-chair of the Racism Restorative Justice Ministry, working to help people heal from wounds of racism and other injustices, including those emanating from the actions within the Catholic Church itself. Bob has also served as part of a team developed a restorative justice strategic plan for Arlington County, Virginia. Long history of helping organizations develop better working relationships with their workforces and other stakeholder groups. And so, Bob, it's a great honor for me to welcome you. And what sort of attracts you to this panel today? What are your main interests?
Thank you, Jerry. As he said, I'm not a member of Georgetown, but I've been coming to the neighborhood here for about 49 and a half years to attend Holy Trinity. This event is about healing from trauma, and what we've done has to do with the process of restorative justice. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done at the parish. I'll talk a little bit about what restorative justice is and some of the ways it has been used. And it's really about restoring from harm and how we can make things right for people who have been harmed or who have committed harm. So I'm very happy to be here with that theme that you have for this marvelous series of events.
Thank you so much. Again, a great honor to welcome you. And even though you're not officially a member of the Georgetown family, you're certainly a close first cousin. So welcome. We have another student here who I had the pleasure of meeting in Professor Marshall's class. Daniel Hermostein is majoring in business and global affairs here at the School of Foreign Service and the McDonough School of Business at Georgetown University. He's an immigrant originally from Guyana. He's a participant in campus groups like Black Gen and GU College Democrats, and he holds leadership positions with the Student Activity Commission and GU NAACP. So it's a great honor for me to welcome you, Daniel, and tell me a little bit about yourself and what attracts you to this event.
Yes, Fatima McGlone, it is an honor for me to be here. Before I even begin, I want to give thanks to Professor Marshall for recommending me for this event. As Fatima McGlone mentioned, I'm originally from South America, in a country called Guyana. I migrated to America in 2016, and ever since, I've lived in the south side of Atlanta, Georgia. Today, my interests mainly revolve around the mental health of youth post-COVID, and especially in school systems. You know, I offer a variety of different perspectives to the discussion today. Obviously, that of an immigrant, that of a minority African-American young man who has been growing up in what some would say is a poverty-stricken community in the United States. And I also offered a unique perspective of someone who's actually worked on the administrative side of school systems, as I was previously the vice chair of the Superintendents and Atlanta Board of Education Student Advisory Council for the city of Atlanta. So I look forward to our discussion today, and yeah, thank you for having me.
Delight to have you here, and again, just amazing sort of synergy of meeting both of you in class and seeing how your passion has really directed our encounter here today. And our final panelist is somebody I've known now for almost 2 years. As a member of the St. John Newman Action Committee, very diverse and important community here in Reston, Virginia, who is advocating for change within the Catholic Church, most especially because of the sexual abuse crisis formed soon after the Pennsylvania grand jury report came out. Bob's lay ministerial work has included Worldwide Marriage Encounter, his Kairos prison ministry, which we'll hear a lot about today, spiritual direction and advocacy for the sexually abused. His earlier work has been with military service, negotiating the Chemical Weapons Convention in Geneva, Switzerland, and providing military advice for the U.S. ambassador there. So, though in Virginia, you're probably a second cousin to us here at Georgetown, but certainly in the family. So welcome, Dennis, and what attracts you to this event today?
I'm a retired member of the St. John Newman Parish of Reston, Virginia. I'm here to offer a personal testimony of what child abuse does when it's exposed in a family setting, and to share my experience of one initiative for supporting victims that can be undertaken in any parish or faith community. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Dennis. So you see already the unique differences and perspectives, but also just real agents of change, and I think that to me is just a theme already that emerged in our early planning meetings, but also in what we might talk about further on. I'd like to begin with you, if I could, Christina, Evelyn. What is it like for you? What does it mean for you to be a black female in a white male-dominated society and in these settings that, so often are dominated by white men?
I just want other black women and young black girls to know that we also deserve to take up space in this society, and in a society that often tells us that we are relegated to a specific box, specifically the strong black woman box. We are more than just that. We are strong and resilient, but we also have our own mental health issues that often get overlooked in order to address other issues, whether it be feminist issues or black issues. We sit at a certain intersectionality that I think deserves to be addressed, and the weight that we have to carry because of that deserves to be addressed. And so I really just want to make sure that people know that we can take up space, and I also want people to take away that I'm trying to break down that myth of the strong black women, because it's not all we are.
Thank you. And look forward to exploring a bit more what that means for you and for us in this event. Bob, what might you talk about what has happened in your work at Holy Trinity Parish here in Washington?
Thank you. In August of 1978, when the Pennsylvania Attorney General issued his report about clergy sexual abuse in the state of Pennsylvania, and at the same time there were revelations about Cardinal McCarrick, the former cardinal here in Washington, Holy Trinity parishioners were hurting. Many of us knew the cardinal personally and had both worked with him and contributed to his causes. Some of our clergy were devastated by what church leaders had done and not done. The pastor turned to us, a group of trained restorative justice circle keepers, to facilitate a series of listening sessions. Those sessions produced a lot of catharsis, or a lot of calls for change, both within the church and within the parish. Some survivors of abuse participated in those sessions, although they did not self-identify. One outcome was an accelerated recognition of our LGBTQ community, and to facilitate a series of parish discussions. And again, they asked us to come to listening sessions so they could, quote, tell their stories to other parishioners. Another catharsis by listening to each other. And for the last 2 years, we've had 3 small groups, 10 to 15 people each, who are using restorative practices to heal in their process of racial healing from the scourges of racism in the United States, and recognize that all of us, no matter what our color is, have suffered from slavery. One group is Half Holy Trinity, parishioners and half from John Wesley AME Zion Church on 14th Street. Another has participation from St. Augustine's Roman Catholic Church. Both predominantly black congregations. We've had services at Holy Rood Cemetery up in Wisconsin Avenue, where many of Trinity's parishioners, slave and freed, are buried in now unmarked graves. Participants in all of these events have had a chance to share their feelings and their ideas. And because of the restorative process we use, they have also been heard by other people.
Wow, thank you, Bob. I'm just so struck by, first of all, finding a voice, as a black woman today, and also rediscovering the voices of those who've been harmed by leaders in faith and fellow parishioners. And so I think it's so important we talk about the multiple forms of trauma, the multiple forms of healing that can come about. But what's striking is the ability to listen and putting listening first, and how important listening is to any process going forward. There also, curiously, the Georgetowner had a piece recently about Holy Trinity and the parish nearby, where in the early 1900s, the black community at Holy Trinity was sanctioned to sit in the balcony, I believe.
They had been asked to sit in the balcony since the beginning of the parish.
They had been
In
asked to sit in the balcony in the
1787.
beginning of the parish, and so
Both
they
free and slaved.
right.
They
And
would have to sit in the balcony, and they could come to communion only after the white people sitting down below had received.
wow.
And in 1923, the Archbishop responded to their request, hey, can we go off by ourselves and start our own parish?
And they did. And where did they start the parish?
Epiphany Parish,
Epiphany Parish,
Right.
here in Georgetown.
the other side of Wisconsin Avenue.
And interestingly, now you all are having an initiative to go back to heal those wounds too. Is that part of this initiative?
Yes, we have a group of people who are digging into Trinity's archives, Georgetown's archives, and working with Epiphany Parish as well as St. Augustine's to uncover the history of the black people, black Catholics, here in Washington, D.C.
And interestingly too, Brian Massengill of Fordham University has been eloquent in talking about how the survivors of clergy sexual abuse have been underreported, undercounted, especially those in marginalized communities, such as Native American communities and the black communities. So being able to give voice, being able to find those individuals so that they're not uncounted anymore, I think is a critical way to heal the damage that's been done. Daniel, you've been working in many different ways and in many different capacities already in Atlanta and here on campus. What point might you want to focus in on for us today, or your general concerns for us to sort of understand? Yes,
Jerry. Well, as I said from the beginning, I'd really like to focus and give light to the major concerns in regards to mental health in school systems. No one actually takes a deep look into the subclass of mental health issues and what exactly is affecting our youth today. I would like to discuss the importance of having a trauma-informed classroom or, school community, especially in regards to our teachers. I believe we need to change the way that teachers are educating the youth in schools today. We cannot continue to teach all of our children the same way because, quite simply, all of our children are not going through the same experiences growing up. I would like to touch on the importance of meeting the needs of students and accompanying them. Jerry, you and I had a discussion beforehand. There are a lot of good Samaritans out there in the world, or as my father likes to say, men of good faith, men and women of good faith, who are coming in and accompanying students and trying to help to resolve a lot of the issues in communities. We must continue to support these individuals going forward. We must encourage them and make them aware of the fact they must continue to show up and stay engaged, especially in African American communities. I would also like to touch on the importance of understanding the marginalized community. And as a society, I've found that we can often jump too quickly to conclusions, most often stereotypical ones. For example, they're going to end up in the criminal justice system, or, they're not going to account to anything. They're not going to become anybody. I feel that we need to ask ourselves why. Why is it that certain communities are actually going through the things that they are? Why is it that it seems that some individuals end up in the criminal justice system more than others? Why is it the case that the majority of these communities seem to produce academically far lower rates than others? Once we address the issue of why, then and only then can we truly address how we can fix these issues. I would like to raise all of these questions today and possibly point out some solutions.
Thank you, Daniel. And I think what your focus in that beautiful image of a trauma-informed classroom reminds me of an article that I read recently, in which, if you have a lens of a trauma-informed teacher versus an untrauma-informed teacher or uninformed trauma teacher, you view discipline and you view behavioral issues very differently. You ask the very question that you're asking, which is why. Why is this behavior happening? Why is this happening? As opposed to judging a behavior and simply dismissing or punishing. And I think that I'd like to hear more about your ways of really looking at that, because I think that's a profound truth in regards to, if we can imagine a trauma-informed classroom, I wonder if we can imagine a trauma-informed parish community. I wonder if we can imagine a trauma-informed way of listening to each other. And I think, to me, that's just a captivating image for us as we think about hope and resilience and a society clearly that is traumatized every day with the rates of violence in the streets that we see and we hear and we experience. Thank you, Daniel. Dennis, you come in with such a range of experiences. What would you like to focus in on today first initially?
Thank you, Jerry. On our action committee at St. John Newman, we take the perspective that to work within the church and not from outside it is the best way to heal the church. Our focus is primarily on the sexual abuse problem and the leadership cover-up that resulted from that scandal. I think there are 3 areas that need attention in order to move forward. They include societal issues, institutional church issues, and parish issues. My personal focus is on the sexual abuse issue because I have a younger brother who was abused by my father. So, 35 years after my father's death, my brother told me that he'd been sexually abused from the age of 9 for several years. So I think that if my father had been alive, I would have killed him. I offer this story in my committee work as well as in Kairos prison ministry, where it gives me some credibility because there with the inmates, and but for the grace of God, go I. Not only did I have that terrible sin on my heart, but I blamed my mother for what my father did to my brother. I shunned her at a time in her life when she needed me most, because that's as far as my logic could take me at the time. So I've had a lot of forgiving to do in my life. First, to forgive my father, and then my mother, and most difficult, to forgive myself. I think learning to forgive has probably saved my soul. And I'd like to pass that message to as many people as possible, that in all of these abuse issues, it's important to learn how to forgive without forgetting. Thank you, Jerry.
And well, Dennis, I thank you, first of all, for your courage, for your witness, for your honesty, transparency, really putting the issue to all of us of what sexual abuse does to a family member, and how yet that's turned into a passion to really continue to minister to those who have likewise been traumatized. But also the role and the nature of what does it mean for you to begin to sort of honor your brother's pain and hurt, and to not let that ever, be forgotten, but yet how that memory allows you to really be a force for healing, a force for what forgiveness might mean for yourself and for others. I just resonate with the complicated nature of what does it mean for any one of us who've experienced abuse, or any one of us who've had family members who've been abused, and the multiple layers of understanding and the multiple layers of real journey and journeying that happens. But thank you for your honesty, and thank you for bearing your soul in that. And just so sorry that it happened to your brother, and so sorry that that pain is still so raw, and that's obvious. But thank you for your sharing. As you can imagine, I mean, we get very quickly into the personal side of what this means, doesn't it? That we have to understand that, as in your case, Dennis, that you've put a face now to what does it mean for us to lift the voices of family members, to lift the voices of your brother, to lift the difficult realities of what one family has experienced, and yet how it's affected the faith family of your community, your parish community, and indeed this Catholic church and this campus, but also many other faith communities and university communities, as we see. A lot already with just initial insights and initial points. So thank you all for your rich sharing already. And so I guess going back, Evelyn, to your own work and to your concerns that you've begun to give voice to, well, what else would you like for us to really hear and to know about what's vital from your perspective?
I just absolutely like to emphasize the idea of child-centered reform and child-centered change when it comes to making these policies and pushing these ideas. I think when we are having these conversations, there are not enough children in the room, and these are the children that are affected by these issues. And it's important to bring them in so that we can hear their perspectives and figure out how they're feeling, because they deserve the credit. They are smart and intelligent, and they are feeling these things so deeply, and they deserve the chance to explain that and give a face to that issue. And then secondly, I'd also like to talk about how we can prepare children that are in the public education system to live life outside of it. I feel like mental health-wise, or even just in terms of imposter syndrome, that's a really big thing that I, myself, and also my friends from back home are dealing with as we step into these prestigious universities. We often don't have a lot of support from our schools simply because they are overworked and underfunded or understaffed. My own experience with my guidance counselor is something that I can laugh about now, but in hindsight, I realize that this is not the experience of my peers that went to schools that had advisors per classroom. But I only talked to my guidance counselor maybe once or twice, and one of those times was when I was in an ambulance with her, so she had to be with me. And so, yes, so that's unfortunate, but I can't even say that it is entirely on her, because she had 600 other students that she needed to deal with. And that's simply too many. When I talk to some of my friends now that came from smaller schools or had smaller graduating classes, they talk about how they had advising sessions, and those had one advisory teacher and like 15 students, and we just did not have that opportunity. And so I feel like that just goes into the goes into the problem of resources. We just need so many more resources. And as Daniel was bringing up with these trauma-informed classrooms, I mean, I can understand why these teachers are reluctant to ask more questions when they're already so overwhelmed and so underpaid. And often the counties don't encourage these sorts of things either because they need the funding. So they'll continue to pass kids that don't necessarily or should not necessarily be passed simply to keep their graduation rate up and to make sure that they continue to get funding. So yes, I just really want to push the point of child-centered reform and also providing resources for these students. Thank you.
Well, thank you, because I think it resonates so much with what we've already heard, but most especially, I think what you're pointing to is the focus that certainly Gillian Huebner has had in the Collaborative on Global Children's Issues, that you can't determine what's best for a child unless you engage the child, unless you put them first by listening to their experience, valuing their insights, and really seeing the fact that a lot of these children in transition, a lot of these children on the move, are doing so because they've responded to a crisis already, and the resilience they're showing to get out of that is astounding. And so you're pointing again to, one of the key flaws I think we've had, not only in society and in community-based programming, but also in faith-based programming is, if you're not talking to the child, if you're not talking to the survivor, anything and everything that comes from that is ill-informed and often ill-advised. And secondarily, how important it is, if we're going to do that, to really put resources behind what it means for us to genuinely attend to the pain, to the trauma that is there. And you're so right that so many, what we've seen, especially post-pandemic, from the CDC studies to the World Health Organization to all of these other organizations, the research is just so clear that we've got to look at the damage that this once-in-a-century reality has done and provide the resources on the ground that really help. So thank you for that tremendous insight. So much to me, I think, resonates with the work that you've done, Bob, too. So tell us more about that work that you've been engaged in precisely, how do you heal families of trauma, communities of trauma, and what are the mechanisms for building that hope and resilience from the ground up?
Thank you. Restorative justice has its origins in the practices of indigenous peoples all around the world. Restorative justice seeks to heal harm when harm has been done. We recognize that everybody involved has been harmed. The person who did the harm, the person who was harmed by what they did, and their communities. They all have some harm feelings because of that. And harm could be all sorts of things. It could be abuse, it could be crime, it could be bullying, it could be demonizing an individual or a group of people. The Truth and Reconciliation, it's not far from how the Truth and Reconciliation commissions worked in South Africa after the period of apartheid. The easiest way to explain restorative justice is to see how it contrasts with our criminal justice system. When a crime is committed, our legal system asks three questions. What laws were broken? Who did it? And how can we punish that person? The focus is almost entirely on the person who did the harm. Victims seldom have any impact on what happens. Restorative justice asks a different set of questions. When harm occurs, it's a violation of people, of relationships, and it creates an obligation. Restorative processes involve victims, offenders, community members, in an effort to, quote, make things right. Three questions. Who has been harmed? What are their needs? And whose obligation are these? Asking these questions leads to a process that involves, to the extent possible, those who have a stake in the offense and the harm: the victim, the offender, and the community. So collectively identify and address the harms, the needs, the obligations, and in order to heal things and make them as right as possible. Ideally, the people who are involved come to a consensus decision on what needs to be done to heal harm. Everyone has a chance to be heard and to be healed. That's the short version.
Well, hopefully, we'll get into a little longer version. What's striking in what you just said is just resonates from my own sort of reaction to both what we see in the streets, what we see in the racial divide in America, is just this inability to understand the rate of perpetration of violence, the rate of perpetration of trauma, and what that just struck me so clear is that that the criminal justice system is focused on the person who did the harm, as opposed to the survivor, and that's so similar to what we've been talking about already, with children not being given a voice, Black women not being given a voice, survivors in faith communities not been given a voice. What would it be like if we had a child-centered, a survivor-centered focus, as opposed to what I see as a perpetrator focus? The organization itself, or the other question I raised. The survivor often goes through treatment. The individual perpetrator might go through treatment. What's the treatment for the organization to change the culture? And that, to me, is what I'm hearing and naturally bubbling forth. What's the treatment we can do as a culture, as a society, to really look at the damage that we continue to inflict upon each other? And so it's a sort of question that I'd like us to sort of come back to, perhaps. Thank you. Daniel, this hits home, I know, at some of your passions too, doesn't it? How would you like to respond to that?
Yes, Jerry. This absolutely hits on a few of my passions. Actually, Mr. Stump, I was actually going to get into restorative practices, but before I offer my perspective on it, I actually do have a quick question. Would you view restorative practices as a positive or a negative in public school systems?
Everything I've been able to learn, it's overwhelmingly positive in healing harm, in disrupting the school.
I 100% agree, and I'm happy to hear you say that because I echo those exact same sentiments. The system of restorative practices, based on what I have also seen, when utilized accurately, this is one of the few effective systems that I've actually seen come through the pipeline that actually helps struggling minorities in achieving educational goals and actually stopping the circulation of the prison pipeline. It is a representation to me that people care, and it brings together the students as well as the educators. I feel that before restorative practices came to be, emphasis was placed on the issues implemented. A lot of horrid things would occur, especially in schools. Going through my thoughts as I was thinking of this topic, I tried to recall some things that I've heard over the years from educators, from teachers. Quotes such as, "Oh, I'm not paid for that," to touch on what you were talking about a little bit, Evelyn. Teachers will say, "They don't pay me enough for that. That's nothing to do with me. I'm not their parent. That's none of my business." Or the other quote of, "Oh, I already know where you're going to end up." Just horrible things to say to a young child who is still growing, who's developing, who is struggling mentally, in some cases emotionally. I've witnessed the devastating and damaging effects that these words can have on our young scholars. Instead of reaching out and trying to help a struggling scholar in a system, the system has been utilized to where we belittle them, or we compare them to one another. If you're a solid academic scholar, and Evelyn, I know you can speak to this, as can so many people in this room, many times, more often than not, teachers will use solid academic scholars or the brightest kids as what I would call props in their classrooms. They'll say, "Oh, well, look at him. He can do it, so why can't you?" I was often, utilized as this prop in schools, and I would often interject and say, well, okay, he's not me. She's not me. I'm not him. I'm not her. I'm not going through what they're going through. I don't have the same struggles at home. You don't know the struggles that they have compared to mine. I'm okay financially. I actually have both parents in my households. Do they? I don't have to work as a serious provider and be a primary source of household income. They do. Mr. Dennis, as you were describing your situation just now, it reaffirmed in my mind that we must account, for these events, these horrid indifferences in child growth that occur in our schools. The negative words spewed at youth and the comparisons simply must stop. It also got me to thinking that, we must prioritize peer communication through aid. It's vital to get to know, what our scholars, what the other person's struggles might be. This is key to me in order to attain resolution. I'm the son of a pastor and a mother who's been to church her entire life. I didn't mention that initially. And oftentimes, in the public school system, coming across certain friends, hearing about certain situations, I would go back to my parents. And my parents, being who they are, they would reach out and they would have conversations, with these friends of mine. They would find out so much about their lives that I didn't even know. And, they would offer them help. Why? Simply because they cared. And, this mattered to my friends. Why? Because here it is, two people, strangers, taking the time to show you that they care. They're taking the time to ask. On the issue of care, I feel that, and this also touches on what you were just speaking about, Evelyn, we must value the individual over the number. And I can, seeing this, from the administrative side, youth will continue to struggle if they're just passed through grade levels in hopes of attaining a certain graduation rate. Oftentimes, as I bring this up, I'm forced to reflect on how this is such a broad and slippery issue, primarily because, as you said, Evelyn, the current education system is set up so that public funding, depends heavily on that number. That graduation rate, it really matters, in regards to the funding that you receive from the government. Administrators have told me before, and they would say all the time, the higher the rate, the better the chance of funds we have. And, we need the funds in order to achieve the same goals that you want. So simply, we just need to get the graduation rate high. Well, while I agree, with the concept of the needs for funds, I would say, to administrators, and I have said to them in the past, that it's time to change the system. We need to value our children over that number. While college is certainly not the only route, to succeeding in life, a college degree is not the end-all, be-all for everything. It is a major safety net in life. In most cases, a college degree can guarantee a solid source of income. Aiming to achieve a number while neglecting the actual learning of scholars, to me, it results in a few things. It results in scholars dropping out as a result of being unable to handle the higher workload. It results in them taking on unnecessary mental burden. And most importantly, it results in them not pursuing a college degree. And all of this, as you were just saying, ties in to this prison pipeline, this criminal justice pipeline. All of these results only contribute to the horrid cycle of poverty, leading to more underdeveloped socioeconomic communities. My favorite teacher growing up once told me, no teacher has ever gotten lost going the extra mile for a student. Why? Because it's never crowded. He says, sadly, it's rare. It's too rare in modern public education systems, even in private education systems, we should point out, to find educators who are in it because they actually care for the well-being of their students. So much of it today comes down to what I said before, oh, I'm not being paid, or that's not my job, that's not my role, this is just a source of income for me. We are no longer prioritizing the actual growth and the development of our scholars. This must change, and we need teachers who mentor and care as well as teach.
Well, Daniel, there's so much in there, and thank you for the richness of that insight. And I think what you've uncovered for us are multiple sort of pathways to really address cultural change and putting the child first, but most especially not presuming to know what they face at home. and putting them in a box that then suddenly, is, where so often, as we've discussed, so often when, an 8 or 9-year-old is told by a teacher, well, we know where you're going to end up in that prison. And imagine what the words and the images, what that has done to that child. Only the presumption being on what their observed behavior, without understanding what's gone on at home, what's gone on in the alleys and streets, prior to coming to that school, and just the nature. What a dear friend used to say: it's one thing to think of sexual abuse; it's another thing to think of all the multiple forms of trauma, from the neglect to the poverty to the physical to the emotional, and as you've pointed out, to the just teachers being so overwhelmed they've opted out of caring. And to me, this is what restorative justice is trying to reclaim, that culture of compassion, that culture of change, that culture of caring. So thank you, Daniel. There's just so much there already. You described traumatized students, teachers, and a system that needs this healing desperately. Dennis, I want to come back to you as Daniel pointed out too, how much your family story has informed your work. Talk to us about your work and how do you deal with systemic trauma and multiple initiatives that you're engaged in.
Thank you, Jerry. So what motivates me in my work is the personal stories of the victims and the unmistakable presence of the Holy Spirit in the work. There's so much to say, not only about the victims of sexual abuse, but about Kairos Prison Ministry, since in both populations you find people who have been abused in every possible way. In both populations you have many cultures. In both ministries, we are just planting seeds. For example, we tell the prisoners right up front, we understand that you are of many religious denominations. We're not here to try to convert anybody, but we're going to talk about Jesus Christ because that's who we worship. You can take whatever you need from what we say and apply it to whatever deity to whom you pray, or not. And, another motivator is that anyone in Kairos ministry who thinks they're going to go evangelize the incarcerated is mistaken. That's not what happens. If anything, they're going to evangelize us. We tell them they are loved. We tell them they are forgiven. We want them to recognize that they have souls, but they affect us. As an example, whereas on the way to the prison, we're always chatting each other up in the car. We like to carpool together, and it's very noisy in there. But you could hear a pin drop in the car on the way home because we're processing everything that's been put on our heart after we have met them. Thanks, Jerry.
Just it reminds me of just the witness of just what compassion and what caring for another, what that does. Evelyn, talk to us more about some of the different issues that you've seen from your perspective in your community and here at Georgetown itself. And I'm just wondering what's hitting at your heart right now as you reflect upon all that's been said and all that you're passionate about too.
Yes. I wanted to thank you both for bringing up the school to prison pipeline because it is something that I feel like a lot of Black children are immediately made aware of as soon as we step into classrooms here in America, especially. The idea that an 8-year-old is then determined, it is determined whether a child is going to go to prison when they are older at 8 years old is ridiculous. And it's horrible, and it affects the way that Black children are socialized, both in the classroom and also by our parents. And I think that that's important to bring up as well. There are many conversations I know that I've heard, and Daniel, I'm sure you've heard this as well, that as soon as you step into the room, you need to make sure that you're at least 2 times smarter. And I know my mom has specifically said for Black women, make that 10 times smarter, just in order to have a seat at the table. And as a result, it affects the way that we think of ourselves. It affects the way that we are socialized within the classroom. And often being intelligent and being smart is used as that prop. My experience before coming to Georgetown, I grew up in a predominantly Black area. My school was predominantly Black, so this has actually been a bit of a culture shock for me, coming into a space that is not like that which I grew up in. And my experience with that is very different, especially in terms of intelligence, where because I was in a STEM program in high school, there was a lot of assumed intelligence that came with the kids that were in that program. And as soon as I step out of that program, as soon as I step out of what we call back home the Roosevelt bubble, I'm noticing that that does not travel with me. I have to prove myself again and again and again, and that is just not something that I'm used to. And it's important to address the ways that we can tackle this idea that we need to be 2 times intelligent, 10 times intelligent, in order to have a seat at the table. So thank you.
Thank you. It's so important that we begin to listen, we begin to understand the other's perspective and those expectations of how often they interfere with our ability to interact, our ability to know, our ability to listen, and to be invited into, a whole different way of understanding what daily life is about. I mean, so often, I think you've really helped us understand, to be here, just to be seen, just to be heard, is a first step, but it's not the end step. And so important for us to begin to understand that, both now, but also what has that been like for centuries of that behavior, that sort of prejudice, that sort of insipid systemic racism, I think is really important. And I think that leads us back to you, Bob, in the sense of what you've seen in regards to what have been the impacts of your restorative justice work, most especially in these issues of racism and in these issues of really trying to be an instrument of healing of just historical trauma, but current trauma.
Rigorous research is very difficult in many situations involving restorative justice. However, most studies of the impacts are cases where crime has been committed. So let me start there. Who benefits? The victim has some say in what happens to themselves and to the offender. They have an opportunity to talk about their experience and have a conversation with the offender. And they're more likely to receive some sort of restitution and have a greater sense of safety and satisfaction with the outcome. The offender has the chance to set things right, to put the incident behind them. Often the issue is resolved faster than a trial and involves little or no jail time. In some cases, their criminal record is expunged. The community. Lower rates of recidivism, less crime in the future, leading to a greater sense of safety. Acts of restitution are less expensive than locking somebody up in jail for a number of years. That's positive cost benefit. What are the impacts of restorative justice in schools? I mean, we've already mentioned the lower, reducing or eliminating the pipeline, but there are lower rates of repeat offenses, fewer suspensions and expulsions, greater sense of community and participation in the school culture. I'll talk later about what has happened to the folks at Trinity.
Thank you. The image that I'm struck with is just the image of restoring relationship and that when we listen, when we honor the other, we restore the most fundamental way that we can relate. And so I think that's pretty amazing. Daniel, what else might be important for us to know today?
Yes, Jerry. So to further elaborate on the concept of mental health neglect in public school systems, I feel that far too long we've ignored the issue. Tying this back to my experience with the Student Advisory Council, the council was created to basically bridge the gap between the Atlanta Board of Education and the students of Atlanta Public Schools, which they serve. More times than not, we, the council, would send out surveys and raise questions to students, asking them themselves, what's the most important issue to them? And by far, number one has always been mental health. We need better counselors. We need school psychiatrists. How can you give us a school counselor who has, like Evelyn was just describing, in your case, it's 600. Wow, I can't even believe that. In my case, it was about 400, one individual. That's ridiculous. No human being is capable of providing the care that children need, when you have 400 of them on your plate. So the fact is, mental health is not being prioritized in our schools. We cannot afford for this to continue because the situation has actually gotten worse because of the pandemic. What does this look like? Recent research shows that we're seeing grades dip, a dip in attendance, and a rise in behavioral issues, a rise in violence, and a rise in trauma that these children are experiencing. In most cases, it's happening in our middle school system. And when I first thought of that, and before I left, we started to notice that the numbers were rising too. And we were asking, is it just the case that the children were home and now they're going back to school? They just need to adjust, and that's basically it. Or people like to say, is this generation just bad kids? Is that and the third? Moving myself away from those general stereotypical beliefs, I asked myself, and I put myself in a position of, a different reality. And I ask you all to do the same thing. Imagine yourselves in the shoes of these youth today who got on a bus one day and went to school in middle school. And when they stepped off of that bus, they were never, ever going to step back to middle school again. The next time they got off the bus, they were in high school. They didn't have a graduation. They didn't enjoy their 8th grade with their peers. All they know is they went home as a middle schooler, and they went back into the world in high school. That is an adjustment that I would be lying if I sat here and I said, I would have just handled it easily. I would have been okay. Because the fact of the matter is there are high school students my age who couldn't handle it. So of course, our younger peers in middle schools, elementary schools, the younger grade levels, 9th grade, they're reacting this way. What we must do now in order to help them is not to belittle them or to turn the other cheek or so forth. We must be there for them. We must offer them the support that they need. A child who just went through a year of COVID and is transitioning from one school to another, that's challenging, quite simply because it's new. It's new to all of us. It's not going back to a known place. So I just think that maybe the behavior problems, Jerry, are a result of fear, of being scared, and not knowing, what's going on, not knowing, what's going to come out of not knowing what's going to come out of this experience. It is not a case of a bad generation of students, which is something that I hear far too often.
That is such a profoundly important point, and I hope we might have a chance to talk about the effects of COVID in the parish communities and in the school communities, because I think this is the pressing issue of where neglect and abuse and violence really lives, is just in that fear, and how people struggle with that. Dennis, you've done some extraordinary things at St. John Neumann in Reston. I want to give a shout out to all of the members of your committee, by the way, who have supported the work here at Georgetown, and give a very special thank you for your entire committee's work at St. John Neumann, and continue to be impressed. And please tell us about what that work has been looking like, and what do you see as sort of the issues that you would like us to really focus in upon?
Okay, thanks, Jerry. Well, first, I'd like to reinforce a couple of the things that have been mentioned. But I want to start by going off script and referring to Daniel's last piece. My daughter is a guidance counselor at a local high school. And I wonder, dear audience, if you are aware that the guidance counselors are the people on staff who prepare all of the college recommendations for their kids, for the school kids. And that work begins in September and carries through to Christmas because those applications have to be in way before graduation. I wonder if you're aware that guidance counselors do all of the testing, aptitude testing, and needs testing for the kids who come to high school. I don't know why those things can't be done by an admin staff so that our counselors can be counselors. My daughter is an excellent counselor. Are you aware, dear audience, that when there's a suicide attempt, the counselor is the person on staff who accompanies the child to court? There are lots of things that those people do, and it's no wonder they don't get to see people when they should. So now I'm going back on script. So we've all mentioned here in one way or another that society is dealing with increased mental health needs due to COVID, physical health needs due to COVID, food supply issues, financial security issues, and physical security issues. Those 5 things, I think, take us all the way back to Psychology 101 because they are in the bottom 2 levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. No wonder we're having trouble moving on. I believe, as a result, that any public policy that does not address one of those 5 needs might not be worthy of adoption. If we want to improve and sustain society, let's address those needs with priority. As far as the institutional church, it seems to me that as the synodal pathway widens, this great examination of the future direction of the church, that a resisting hierarchy seems oblivious to contributing to its own looming irrelevance in leading and healing the church. I believe that continuing reform of priest formation is a central key if there's a hierarchy that will support it. And only to the extent that the hierarchy does support it, will it then be those priests working in our parishes who will restore full trust in the Catholic faith, or not. Lastly, I believe a transformative thing for a parish to do is to form a committee like the one we have at St. John Newman, in which I serve, to work within the institutional church rather than outside it. It's necessary to continue to advocate for victims of sexual abuse in order to effect change, transparency, and inclusion in our church, and to seek its ongoing reform. Now, in the last 3 years at our parish, our committee has hosted an evening of testimony in our auditorium with Teresa Pitt Green's group called Spirit Fire. We had 85 attendees, and unexpectedly during that event, 2 elderly people self-disclosed their sexual abuse early in their lives. It was very powerful. We have also showed the movie Spotlight, and we're planning to show another movie this summer. We've collaborated with you, Jerry, in presenting a panel hosted by Georgetown and Harvard universities. We annually plant 300 pinwheels in front of our church for Child Abuse Prevention Month, along with a couple of posters. And then we invite the kids of the parish to take those pinwheels home at the end of the month. We are going to host Michael Mack's one-act play called Conversations with My Molester, A Journey of Faith, on April the 20th at 7 p.m. in our auditorium. And we're planning this fall an interfaith event to address sexual abuse across the Presbyterian, Baptist, Methodist, and Jewish, as well as Catholic faiths. Those are some of the things we're doing, Jerry. Thank you.
Wow, that's a lot. So thank you yet again, Dennis. This is an opportunity for those in our audience now. If you have a question, or those online, if we have any questions that we can field. But I'm just touched by the similarities and the amazing sort of ways that all of us are pointing to different ways of listening, different ways of being present, different ways of listening to and respecting and honoring the voices of the marginalized in society and children in particular, that if we're to create new policies or to create change, they have to be the real focus of that change. And the need and understanding of treating trauma at every level of our school or faith community. So those are the sort of common themes that there's a richness to what has already been expressed, and I thank you all for that. Opening up to questions from our audience. Yes.
Catherine Marshall, and I'm at the Berkeley Center. But I taught a freshman seminar this fall, and Daniel and Evelyn were both part of that. And it was focused on COVID and pandemics. And somewhat to my surprise, every one of the groups that did research projects and presented at the end focused on the mental health problem. It's been written about, but it was very striking that in this new cohort at Georgetown, this was such a preoccupation and such a focus that I think goes beyond the COVID crisis, but is also COVID related. So I have two questions for Evelyn and Daniel. One is, I'm curious as to whether, this is typecasting you a little bit, but do you see differences in a way in which girls and boys experience this rather extraordinary COVID challenge? And we know that abuse is reported, but I'm not thinking so much of abuse as in the broader. And then secondly, as you are here at Georgetown, what do you see that the university should be doing, seeing this really quite extraordinary period that you've lived, which has affected every individual in different ways? But what collectively can be done to try to take this into account?
I'll address that first. First of all, hi, Professor Marshall. It's nice to see you again. I know me and Daniel were excited knowing that you were coming to see this. In terms of mental health, the differences, I think, come down to the conversations that we have about it. I feel like, and this might be a bit of a stereotype, and please let me know if I'm overstepping, Daniel, but I feel like when I talk to my friends who are guys, they don't talk about mental health as much among one another as I would with some of my other friends who are women. And, we'll have conversations about these sorts of things. And it's becoming more and more popular and more of a topic that we see online. There are a lot of influencers that have built platforms around talking about their mental health and addressing these issues, which I think has made it more mainstream and a little bit easier for us to talk about. But I still think that part of the reason why it was such a big issue for our class is because we're feeling it so deeply. I mean, having to go online and experience online schooling and that isolation from your friends and that isolation from being just around people has really affected us in ways that we were very quick to talk about in class, which I think is how we ended up with that conclusion.
Yes, Evelyn, you're definitely not overstepping. You actually were going in the direction that I'm heading right now. In terms of the difference between men and women, it's clear that boys don't necessarily want to discuss mental health issues. And I tie it back mainly to, at least in some of the experiences I've experienced with some of my friends, our need to be viewed as the stereotypical man. The stereotypical man doesn't, discuss, his feelings. I'm an immigrant, so I'm offering an immigrant's perspective here as well as a minority's perspective. And a lot of my friends are also immigrants who come from many of them do come from Africa or the Caribbean parts of the country, and some from the south side of Atlanta. And oftentimes growing up in these homes, our fathers, our mothers, and so forth, from day one, we're told you have to be the provider for the home, you have to be strong no matter what, we don't have time for you to be in your feelings, this, that, and the third. So I wasn't raised, to discuss my feelings. Actually recently, we had this discussion, an entire debate on my floor, which I love in New South too. They had an argument about, those of us who are going to go see a therapist. And, I was one of those kids who sort of objected to it primarily because of, the way I was raised. And looking around the room after the dust settled and everybody stopped yelling at each other and so forth, it was clear that, oh, wait, it was actually the majority of the women who were actually we actually need to go discuss our feelings. There's nothing wrong with go seeing a therapist. And us guys were just sitting back like, why would I go and discuss my feelings with another person? Like, how are they going to help me? In what way, shape, or form are they going to help me? This doesn't make any sense to me. So that's definitely a major difference that I see in terms of the way men and women choose to handle mental health. I'll also add that, a major factor, in difference that leads to the difference in the experience is the fact that we have lived in a male-dominated society for so long. A lot of women have had to, over the years, sort of been forced to find some way, to reach out, find someone to talk to because they sort of needed it. Whereas men more so, we can sort of like get by, but because we sort of just have this dominance in society already, so we don't necessarily have to address it as much as some women do. And you can tell me if I was right there. I will also add.
You want to respond to that?
No, I agree. I think it's interesting. I think what Daniel brings up about the idea of going to therapy is kind of where it starts, because even in my own household, both me and my mother go to therapy, and my father is adamantly against going for himself. And I think part of that is just the way that he was brought up and the way that men are taught to be strong. And I think that's the way that the patriarchy maintains power, honestly, by telling you that you don't have feelings that deserve to be addressed and telling you that you don't need a space in order to just be, and that you always have to have some sort of facade. So I think that that is a problem that is affecting both men and women. But.
And Daniel, I'm a little older than you are, and it's very sad to find out things haven't changed.
I think there was a second, or we have another question, please.
Thanks. My name's Mark Engman, and I hate to pick on you, but would like to address this to our student panelists as well. You've talked so much about mental health and in particular children at the table. From my experience, both in DC public schools and from my work, there's a lot of people making decisions for children with their best interests in their minds, but children are not meaningful parts of the decision-making process. So I'm just wondering, just from your perspective, what works, not just to hear children's voices, but to actually make those voices meaningful in the policy-making processes so that, budgets and policies actually stem from those positions. And finally, just a question about rights. We hear a lot of talk about child rights or about parental rights. Is there any thought to the fact that children have a right to participation in decisions that affect them?
Yes. So I'm so glad you asked this question. Oh my goodness. Okay. Okay. So this actually goes back directly to my work with the Student Advisory Council and the Atlanta Board of Education for years, because quick backstory, I came here in middle school, and we noticed a lot of the issues that were going on from right then and there in the 7th grade. At the time, my brother was already in high school, and he was trying to reach out to higher levels of administration. My mom was always knocking on the doors, walking into people's offices, this, that, and the third, trying to advocate that, okay, you guys are doing this, but this is what the children actually want. And then it wasn't until about 2 years ago, to answer your question, first of all, it takes the right person. It takes people actually listening, going back to what Father Jerry was saying. We were actually able to find just a few people in the administrative office that actually listened to this idea that there could be a student advisory council that actually met and actually discussed the system policies. Not just coming together for your typical, Q&A session, I'm your board member, what do you want? No, actually, this is Atlanta Public Schools budget. We're giving you access to it. These are the issues that have faced us over the past 5 years. We're presenting them to you. This is the direction we want to take the public school system in the next 10 years. What are you guys' thoughts on this? They actually like opened the door to us. We were actually able to sit down and had long, sometimes stressful meetings and long debates and arguments. We were actually able to offer meaningful perspective. And what it does is it shuts down a lot of the things that, people, try to push that we just know we don't want necessarily. And Evelyn, I know you can speak to this because it happens so often where, schools, for example, because adults are the ones making the decisions, they have their best interests at heart. But some of the policies and the initiatives that they try to push for it just necessarily don't mean anything to us. And by actually having us as students, represent ourselves and actually, have sort of equal footing with you at the table in terms of discussions, we're able to prioritize the issues that we are actually feeling rather than the policies that you're trying to push.
Thank you, Daniel. I completely agree with what you've just said. I think I'd like to bring up 2 points. One is that I recently attended a panel put on by Wired Human, and they were really talking about child-centered reform in terms of technology and how we can make sure that children online are protected. And they had policymakers in there, they had representatives from Roblox and Twitter, and just people in there willing to speak to students like me, my friends, my roommate was there, but also younger children. We had someone who was 14 talking about her experience with technology. So I think that by including children, it's very important. I mean, if these policies are going to affect them, might as well get their input. But then when I talk about my own experience, I think about specifically my experience with leading protests in middle school, which I think is, I think it's like a little bit, in hindsight, I'm like, oh, I just feel like I shouldn't have had to do that. But it was something that, after the Parkland shooting was very deeply affecting my area in terms of we just felt we needed to stand with those students. And even being in middle school, we would lead marches, we led walkouts. And so that was our way of speaking up, even when administration could do nothing for us. And so I think children are trying to speak up. Children have the ability to, and while I don't think they should always have to, I think it's important to include them in those conversations.
Yes, Gillian, you have a question, and then we have a couple questions from our online audience too. Hopefully, we can get to. Yeah, make sure your microphone is on.
On. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all so much for sharing this just array of perspectives coming in from different angles. It's helpful. My question is, I was just thinking, based on what you were talking about in terms of mental health, there was a really interesting piece done in, it was an opinion piece in Newsweek called "The Story We Are Telling About Youth Mental Health is Hurting Our Kids." And one of the facets of that was that, with this, we're overwhelmed, everybody's struggling. There's a very strong deficit approach to that, rather than also unpacking the prevention side, right? We know actually the CDC released a report in 2018 that 1 billion children annually between the ages of 2 and 17 experience violence each year. But they didn't just send out that report and say, this is horrible, there's a crisis of violence against children in the world. They unpacked it and said, here are 7 strategies to prevent violence, which were very realistic and tangible and things that a church community could take on or a school community could take on. And so I guess my question is, with all of the really essential work and life-changing work you're doing on a healing side, to what extent are you also working on the prevention side? What technologies are we giving to our communities that are based in evidence, informed by young people who've been affected by violence, to really go upstream and deal with prevention? Because it's easier to prevent than it is to heal.
If I may, this ties into the question from online in the sense of seeing just such a rise in pre-K violence and gun violence in particular. And so what do you recommend? What do you see in community-based whether it's in Kairos ministry or whether it's in your own experience from the communities. What do you see as concrete sort of preventative strategies, if you can, and quickly if you can?
Yes, I'll go quickly. So first, the first thing I would touch on in terms of prevention is we actually need to put more money towards the mental health aspects in public schools. We actually need to provide more counselors in school. We need to make more psychiatrists available. You know, a debate that we often had at the council, you know, often regarded the mental health budget, which at the time was about $9 million. And then they had about $37 million going towards rehabilitation programs. And I would often make the argument, would it not make more sense to put the majority of the money towards the issue of fixing the students' mental health? That way, you wouldn't need this much money going towards rehabilitation programs, because the major contributor to students always needing these rehabilitation programs is the fact that their mental health is like so neglected. If we actually prioritize their mental health and we actually made counselors available and we actually were there for students and we actually made them feel like, you know, somebody cared, made them feel like, you know, they can actually make it through this, I think that a child would actually be produced academically at a much higher and a much more efficient rate if we took that stance, rather than saying, oh, well, you know, $8 million towards mental health, and, you know, we need this money because so many students are struggling. So many students would not be struggling if we chose to address the issue first.
Bob, any quick insight?
There are, I've heard stories of a number of schools where the staff, beginning with the principal, administrators, and teachers, get into circle together to talk about the school and how they're going to run the school and how to address the kinds of issues that Daniel is talking about. I heard one story. There's two kids, I'm not sure whether they're middle school or high school, and they were about to have a fight, and this one kid had the fist up like this, all of a sudden ready to hit, and said, "Stop, we need a circle."
There's hope. There's prevention. We are coming to a conclusion. There was only one other question we didn't get to online, and that was dealing with whether Georgetown or even the Collaborative on Global Children's Issue has a policy or a statement on lifting statute of limitations, specifically, most especially in regards to the Archdiocese of Baltimore and the upcoming Attorney General's report. I don't know if Georgetown having a position on that. I don't think the Collaborative does. I know personally I'm a huge advocate of giving voice to survivors at whatever point in the journey, and if it means lifting statute of limitations for them to have any sort of sense of restorative justice, then so be it. If we need to be a more poor organization because of our failures, then so be it. But that's my personal opinion. I don't think that's an opinion of Georgetown University. We are at our time when I really want to go back to each of the panelists here, you know, and begin to focus in on what might be your final sort of takeaway. What would be your final sort of thing that you would want our audience here today to hear, or our audience online? Would you like to go first, or are you okay, or would you like to take a pass?
Sorry about that, everyone. Yes, my final takeaway. I would like to end on a note of hope and addressing the fact that there are programs out there that are helping students. There are communities out there that are realizing that these issues are prevalent and attempting to do things about it. And I'd really like to end with the idea that, yes, I'm big on child-centered reform and making sure that children are in the room when these decisions are happening. But I also think that we should acknowledge that it should not come to a point where children have to be in the room. And it shouldn't come to a point where children have to be speaking up because the adults are not doing anything and the adults are not helping them. While I think that, yes, now we do need children, I think when we are making these decisions, we should make it so that more children do not have to continue to be in that room because we've fixed things, or we've started moving in a direction to fix things, and we started moving towards positive change. And so while I'm happy that more children are being given a platform and a voice to speak up. I also think that children should have the ability to stay and remain children and to enjoy that without having to have this big burden placed on their shoulders.
Thank you so much. Bob, what's your takeaway that you would like our audience to know today?
Restorative justice changes people. It builds hope and it builds resilience. The benefit of being listened to and being able to have their say in what happens after harm is committed cannot be quantified. The impact can be life-changing. People of Holy Trinity who participated in the sessions we've had about clergy sexual abuse, the lives of our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, and the healing wounds inflicted by our history of racism, regardless of what our color. People are changed. They have a sense of peace and an energy to help others heal. Restorative justice is a sea change in how we deal with each other and build communities.
Thank you, Bob. Daniel, would you have some final takeaways you would want our audience to sort of think about and reflect upon?
Yes. The way I would build hope and resilience is through the exhibition of actionable progress. Though COVID was a huge setback in every way, shape, or form, the one positive it has forced the powers that be, the one positive is that it has forced the powers that be to address the mental health issue in school systems. I find it important that conversations such as the ones we've had here today continue to happen. However, it is time for words to be put into action. Beyond the conversations, it's important that work gets done, and it's important that we continue to push for the positive change that will best foster the next generation.
Thank you, Daniel. Dennis, would you like to share your takeaway?
Thanks, Jerry. So I would like people to know that victimization, of course, comes in many forms. Some of it can be healed and some of it can't. Sexual abuse is of the latter type. It scabs, but it does not heal. My takeaway with respect to the church is, in order to promote resilience and sustainability in child safety, I believe the institutional church must first be proactive and building and sustaining a renewed self. Unless and until we can move in that direction along the synodal path, I am concerned that we will find evangelization of our faith increasingly falling on deaf ears. Lastly, I would like us to see Daniel and Evelyn in government.
Certainly get my vote right away. Just an engaging and just, I think, groundbreaking event for us today. I want to thank our audience members here present and thank those online. The takeaway that I have for today is the power of listening, the power of relationships. The voices of the marginalized need to be heard and put front and center, the voices of children in policy making, but most especially that we can confront the violence done in our communities and in our faith communities by different ways of transforming hope and resilience and transforming cultures, that we can be a culture, we can be a place of hope and resilience by listening to one another and having this continuing dialogue and continuing conversation. Again, I encourage you to go to the Collaborative on Global Children's Issues website, see the rest of the events for this week, and certainly following us at the Towards a Global Culture of Safeguarding here at Georgetown University in the Berkeley Center. I personally just want to say thank you to all of you, to Evelyn, Christina, to you, Bob, Daniel, and Dennis. Your insights, your witness, first of all, your courage is just something that I think allows us to become who we really are, which is a force for good in this culture. So thank you all. Appreciate it.